Okay. So we're going to make a start. And first of all, welcome everyone. So my name is James Harrison, and I'm the co-director of the University of Warwick Centre for Human Rights in Practice. My co-director, Andrew Williams, who's at the back, and myself have organised this summit on protest, which you're all attending. Our centre proposed and organised this summit because we saw the wide range of strongly held views across our university on this issue. Our hope is that through this summit process we will, first, increase knowledge of recent events in relation to protest on the university campus. Second, enhance mutual understanding of different perspectives on these issues among our university community. And third, and most importantly, learn lessons and explore what we might do differently in the future. So we first surveyed the university community. All staff and students were given an opportunity to respond to find out their views. We summarised the results of that survey in the document you should have all been handed as you came in through the doors. We asked people what concerns they had, what they wanted done differently in the future, what questions they wanted answered, and who they wanted to answer those questions at this summit. As far as we're aware, Warwick is the first university to attempt this kind of process. And we are very grateful to all the members of the panel you can see here today for their cooperation throughout this process and for agreeing to participate today. We have invited the top 6 individuals or representatives identified by you in the survey who you wanted here to respond to your questions and concerns. And that is important to make clear. The panel we have assembled are here to respond to the questions which we have summarised in section 3 of the survey. And we have identified for each speaker the questions that we think are particularly relevant to them. Some of the speakers have indicated that they are unable to answer specific questions, and this is because there are legal and other proceedings still ongoing. Where this is the case, we have asked them to explain the situations and tell us when further information is likely to be forthcoming. The speakers will speak in the running order set out in section 4 of the survey. The only change to that order is that we will start with the Registrar, Ken Sloan, who will deal with the operational issues in relation to recent protest-related events at Warwick. And we'll end with the Vice-Chancellor, who will talk about issues relating to the future of protest at Warwick. For obvious reasons, that seems sensible: past and present first, future at the end. In between, we will hear from the President of the Students' Union, Kat Turan, Chief Superintendent of Coventry Police, Claire Bell, representatives of Warwick For Free Education, Callum Cant and Hope Warsdale, and Deputy Registrar Joe Horsberg, who has overall responsibility for security issues on the university campus, and Mark Kennell, who is Head of Security. We have given each member of the panel 8 minutes to answer questions raised by the survey that are relevant to them. Callum and Hope and Joe and Mark have opted to split their 8 minutes between them, so they'll have 4 each. I will have to strictly enforce these time limits so we can hear from everyone. And then it's over to you, the audience. You contain representatives from across the Warwick community, in that we have academic staff, administrative staff, postgraduate and undergraduate students in this audience. We need to balance the need to allow you to have your say with our wish to hear from a wide range of different voices. So we will allow opinions and questions from the floor of no more than 1 minute in duration. We have to be out of here at 6 p.m. so the cinema staff can prepare for the 7 p.m. filming of Behind the Beautiful Forevers. So if everyone can help me by keeping to those timings, I'll be very grateful. The event was sold out in 12 hours. You can see some people didn't turn up. But we've therefore arranged it to be simultaneously broadcast by Warwick's audiovisual services so that all those who are not able to get places can watch and participate. So I hope you're all hearing me loud and clear over the lecture capture system. You can text in perhaps now to let us know. There are people monitoring the text that you're sending in the corner. And you can also text your comments and questions to the speakers. Andrew Williams, my co-director, will raise questions submitted electronically that seem important and are different from those being raised by the audience here to the extent that time allows. Finally then from me, 3 housekeeping points. So firstly, a recording of the summit will be available via the Centre's website from lunchtime tomorrow. So there is no need for anyone in the audience to attempt to record proceedings. And we would ask that you refrain from doing so. Secondly, we've booked the National Grid room upstairs, which is, if you're going up the stairs up there, it's directly in front of you up the stairs. as a quiet room for anyone who feels distressed by the discussions, as it was suggested to us that some of those who are involved in the events related to the protest on campus before Christmas would like to have this available. Third and finally, we know this summit raises important issues that people feel passionately about. I'm sure that we would all agree that we want to carry out these discussions in an atmosphere of mutual respect and consideration. You've asked for these people on the panel to be here, so please let them speak uninterrupted in the first half of our session. You will then have an opportunity to put any reasonable questions to them in the second half, including any questions you feel they haven't addressed properly in the first. I've assured the participants that I will stop proceedings if our discussions aren't conducted with the respect we all expect and deserve from each other. I'm sure that this isn't going to happen, and we'll have a rich and fruitful dialogue that produces important and useful ideas for the future. And so without further hesitation, I'm going to give the floor to our first speaker, who's Registrar Ken Sloan.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Before we begin to discuss the events that took place in December 2014, and before we start to consider how to move forward more generally, I think it's important to consider protest activity in Warwick in general. Historically, protests and other events at Warwick have been managed in a collaborative way, with all parties, students and university management, respecting the core values of our university, a place where debate, discussion and, yes, sometimes protest, sit at the heart of what makes us a university, sitting alongside the need to allow the university, its members and its visitors to continue to operate and move around the campus without disruption. In fact, the university hosts hundreds of events every year, vast majority being peacefully facilitated by our security services team and passing off without incident. Peaceful protest has always and will always be welcomed, encouraged and facilitated at Warwick. However, when these protests no longer operate within the boundaries of the law or disrupt significantly the operation of the university, the way in which we deal with them has to be different. It is very apparent that over recent years, the dynamics of protests have changed nationally. That is reflected in the way in which protest activity has manifested itself on some occasions at Warwick. We're now seeing a shift towards more general occupational protest. Whilst it is true that Warwick has experienced such occupations of key buildings in the past, i.e. Senate House occupation for 8 days in 2013, it is fair to say that the events of December 2014 were something that Warwick had not witnessed before in its recent history. The involvement of protesters who were not formally part of the university brought a new challenge, and this was reflected in part by what took place on the 3rd of December at Senate House, and then again between the 4th and 12th of December in Reeks. For university property to be deliberately and violently damaged as it was, and for staff to be confronted by masked individuals as they were, whilst they attempt to go around their work, is unacceptable and shouldn't be tolerated. This changing approach to process at Warwick makes it much more challenging to manage and engage, and much more difficult to enter into the necessary, meaningful two-way dialogue with the protesters which underpins so many events and protests that take place and have taken place. As has been reported, there is CCTV footage of a number of protesters forcing entry to Senate House and of the subsequent sit-in, but this cannot be released until the ongoing legal process has been concluded. When this process concludes, we'll consider releasing the CCTV or making it available for access, but no further comment can be made at this point in time. This also goes for the actions of the police. It is not our place to condemn or otherwise comment on how the officers acted on the 9th to the 3rd of December. The Independent Police Complaints Commission report must address that and will address that, and we will respond accordingly. To ensure that we learn lessons from the events of December, I have asked the Vice-Chair of the University Council to investigate any formal complaints made against the actions of any members of university staff. Whilst there have been much comment and conjecture on social media, the university has not received any formal complaints from any member of the university community about the behaviour of university staff during the December process. If they are received and they are specific in evidence, then they will be investigated. If there are general comments or observations, then of course we'll take them seriously when considering arrangements for the future. The university continually seeks to protect the interests of all members of its community and to allow people to express their views and opinions in ways which are constructive and do not disrupt or intimidate others. All members of our community need to be able to feel that they can carry on with their day-to-day lives here without the threat of disruption or intimidation. We actively encourage freedom of speech, and this is in part secured via the university's Regulation 29, which covers meetings on university premises. However, freedom of expression does not mean the right to deliberately disrupt or upset other members of the university community, nor does it give anyone the right to engage in intimidating or unlawful behaviour. All members of the university are expected to treat others with dignity and respect. The Dignity at Warwick policy applies to students and to staff. If there is any evidence to suggest that individuals or individuals have fallen short of the expectations laid down by this policy, then it should be considered through our internal procedures. I repeat that this applies equally to students and staff. Any complaints made under the aegis of that policy should and will be investigated. In terms of the criticism that we have faced regarding communications between the university and the protesters, when we are faced with a dynamic situation as was witnessed in December, communication must also be dynamic and respond to the ever-developing situation. For the first time in recent times, we found ourselves dealing with a protest that, as we could see it, involved unlawful and intimidating behaviour. Having been used to lawful and peaceful protest in the past, our communication strategy was not prepared for how the situation developed, particularly the flow of information on social media. The email report that was sent out on the 8th of December 2014 was based on the facts that were presented to us at the time. Those facts remain accurate until proven otherwise. The email was based on the accounts of those members of staff directly involved in the process, and we do not consider that it showed a bias towards any of the parties involved. I reiterate that it would not have been, nor would it have been appropriate for us to condone the actions of the police, or condemn the actions of the police, as I know many believe we should have. I acknowledge the university communities could have been managed more effectively, and we have learned from this experience. Many people will know that there was a significant amount of traffic and footage being pushed through social, regional and national media. The focus of our communication was to give an account of the facts as they were presented to us. What this situation has taught us is that, as well as dealing with general internal and external communications, we must also separately but concurrently communicate with those directly affected by such incidents. We should not assume that the general communications are sufficient. This was done by some members of the team operating on the ground, but this will in future be done at an institutional level as well. Our procedures for supporting and managing events on campus have been updated to make this clear. I know that many members of the Warwick community have questioned whether the injunction was necessary. When you consider that the 8-day occupation of routes cost the university in excess of £31,000 and led to cancellation or urgent management rearrangement of a number of events, including the cancellation of performances of the Christmas production of the Gruffalo, affecting 500 local school children, and the near cancellation of a major event involving 2,000 members of the UK and international Jewish community, I can tell you that I believe the injunction was necessary and was justified. Had the occupation gone into the following week, then the event for the Jewish community would have had to be cancelled. Occupation without permission is trespass. It is unlawful and it is wrong. Let us not forget that attempts to engage with the occupying protesters were made by the academic registrar, a university chaplain and the head of security services. These attempts to engage and negotiate were at times met with intimidating behaviour by masked, silent individuals. Any belief that we did not attempt to engage is misplaced. When it became apparent that the occupiers were not willing to engage with the university, that the occupation was planned for an indefinite period of time, and that many of the demands being made were not within the university's gift, we were forced to seek legal remedy. It is true that the injunction is campus-wide and exists to prevent further occupational protest on the campus, but I sincerely hope that we will never have to invoke its terms. I hope that steps arising from today's event will mean that this is the case. However, if there is a continued demonstrable and material disruption to the operation of the university or the welfare of its community, we can invoke the injunction. I would hope that as a community we can work together to allow peaceful protests to be facilitated and managed once again, to ensure that the welfare of all members of the community is maintained. I do not think that the policies need to be adopted to cover protests specifically. I think they need to include all types of events that we have on the campus. With early engagement, the university will be able to accommodate most requests for holding a demonstration or protest, and with many, many different examples of where this has been the case. There are many different means to engage with the university on concerns, and we hope that individuals will continue to do so. Past protests have been handled in a very open and engaging way, and it's only recently that this approach has changed. Individuals find themselves now on the receiving end of targeted campaigns bordering on harassment, and we would like to see this stop. As Andrew and James have explained, the summit is an opportunity to discuss these issues in an open and transparent manner, and I hope we all find it engaging and useful. Thank you.
So, moving on to Kat Turan, President of the Students' Union.
Hello. Should I put the microphone? Okay. Hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Thanks. Oh, this is nerve-wracking. Right. As far as the Students' Union is concerned, we obviously never want to see what occurred in December happen again. I will talk through the events from our perspective and then suggest some ideas going forward. For our part, we're confident that the Students' Union did the right thing under difficult circumstances. We were placed in the position of having to react to the events as they were unfolding and constantly weighing up all the evidence available to us at the time. The situation was one of the most serious we have had to deal with as an organisation in over a decade and was duly treated as such. The entire sabbatical officer team consulted extensively with others to formulate the wording of our response, and we can assure everyone that all arguments, both for and against, were considered thoroughly before it was released, despite the pressure of limited time and the continuing emergence of information. As far as it was possible to gauge, the statement we issued was widely supported by many students and articulated the concerns that many had in response to the events, including those that we shared ourselves as both student representatives and members of the university community. This is particularly important given that many students felt the university did not respond to these concerns, but instead defended the actions of security staff while refusing to condemn the police violence. The Students' Union is here for students, and it was right that we responded in a way that ensured that this view was represented. We condemned the police action as disproportionate and supported the demo the following day in reaction to this. Despite this, however, we also made it clear in our response that full facts around the various incidents were still being established. In the events which followed, our role was to facilitate communication between the protesters and university management, as well as to ensure the welfare of those students participating. This we would have done for any member in a similar situation, regardless of anyone's opinion on the politics surrounding the process. That is both our duty as a student welfare organisation and the right thing to do. Months on, we have offered advice to students who have needed legal guidance, even going off campus to assure that this was delivered face-to-face. Our advice services help thousands of students with a range of issues, and again, I would assert that we would do this for any student. Many of the biggest criticisms of the union's stated position came from the members of the postgraduate community, who had their learning spaces disrupted, their offices shut down, or felt intimidated by the protest. I'll address the specific issues surrounding the location of protests in a moment, but for our part, Andrew sat down with many of the PG students from Senate House in the aftermath and has been in constant communication since. The feeling that came from those students was that perhaps we alienated members of that community who already felt underrepresented and did not communicate to them what was happening right outside the windows where they work. This is obviously a concern to us, as is any when groups of students feel we do not represent them, and is something we keenly wish to address. The SU is as much for our postgraduate students as it is for our undergraduates. As hard as that may be for us to achieve sometimes, this remains our aim. However, it is worth noting that student campaigners have listened to and learned from the postgraduates in Senate House on this issue. Several events that were going to be held on Senate lawn were later moved to the piazza or changed into marches towards University House, which is a much more of a direct impact on university management rather than postgraduate students. Despite its symbolic history and central location on campus, evidently Senate House is no longer the ideal location for protests, as it is predominantly now used as a student space. So, this is about moving forward and what we can learn from the events of December. Firstly, I think there is a pressing need to address the disconnect between students and university management. I, as the President, meet with the Vice-Chancellor once a month for half an hour, as well as attending a range of university meetings, including the fortnightly steering committee and University Council and Senate. Despite student representation on a range of boards, however, the wider student body still struggle to understand the decisions that the university make. Indeed, the university is seen as a distant corporate body which is out of touch with students. While the sabbatical team try and communicate as much as we can, I think it's essential for senior members of staff to have a direct dialogue with students and can be held accountable where necessary. Isaac Lee, the next president, has suggested a termly Q&A session with the V&A, the Registrar, etc., for students to attend and ask questions about why and how the university have made certain decisions. I, for one, think this is an excellent idea. There is also perhaps some opportunities where students arrive at university and through some accessible links on the website to explain how it works and who is who. Secondly, I think there not only needs to be a code of conduct for security, but perhaps a charter around how protests on campuses are conducted. While the actions of security need to be scrutinised, it's also important for peaceful protests to happen in an environment where everybody feels safe. Perhaps some agreed actions, such as establishing when it's right for security to be at a protest, when an additional police presence is necessary, and activists not protesting outside Senate House or recording staff members without their consent, will be welcomed by everyone on campus. After all, it is a two-way process. Both students and staff need to respect students' right to protest, but they also have the right not to feel threatened or intimidated in their place of work or study. This also applies to safe spaces and demonstrations not being overridden by particular groups. Finally, we must assure the events of December the 3rd are never repeated. I want to see a university which encourages debate, a university where students and staff can safely voice their opinions, even when they differ from the university or each other. The SU will of course vigorously defend our members' right to debate and take part in peaceful protest. However, to do this we must involve everyone. Today's summit is an ideal opportunity to move things forward through positive dialogue and debate with all parties. Thank you.
So we're going to move on to Chief Superintendent of Coventry Police, Claire Bell.
Thank you. Can I start by thanking you for the opportunity to be part of this event? I get a sense that I'm not necessarily the most popular person sat on the stage, but I really do feel that it's a healthy approach to having a mature discussion about protest, so thank you. We've already mentioned that there are parts of what happened on the 3rd of December that I can't go into, and so there are going to be questions that I'm not going to be able to answer. That's because there is a criminal trial that's pending, and that's due to come to court in July. And also, the matter was referred by myself the next day to our professional standards department, and now there is an independent police complaint commission investigation into the conduct of the officers. So for those reasons, I can't go into the detail of what happened on the day of 3rd of December. So. However, I think that if we'd have waited until both the criminal investigation and the IPCC inquiry were concluded, then we would be into another academic year. And I guess for some people in this room, that would mean that you would have left university. So I do think it's helpful that we are able to have this discussion now, and we will be able to come back and have a further discussion when both of those inquiries have been concluded. I hope to try and answer as many of the questions that are posed in the survey as possible, but before I do, I just want to make a few key points. So the police did not attend campus on the day of the 3rd of December to police the protest. They attended following the report of a criminal allegation. And this is what we would describe as a dynamic or spontaneous incident. So officers attended knowing only the basic facts. Certainly the officers attending weren't aware that there was a protest on the university. And they were dispatched immediately following a call being received. This is very different to how officers would and did manage the subsequent planned protest the day after. Many of us were not present on the 3rd of December. I certainly wasn't. I can't comment on the actions of any of the parties involved, whether that be the police, the protesters or security staff. For the reasons I explained, I can't go into that. But no doubt we all in this room have a private view of what did or didn't happen. What I know, though, is that I'm very interested in understanding better, by being here tonight, the views of the people that have been highlighted in the survey, in particular about police action. As a local police commander, this bothers me that there are concerns about how the police acted when they were on the university campus. So regardless of where, if anywhere, blame is ultimately levelled, I want to hear about what people's views are. The police, in my opinion, are both the minder and reminder of community, and so whilst we do have to police a range of situations, many involving conflict, we also aspire to ensure that our interventions leave communities feeling better off as a result and that they build cohesion. This is an easy statement to make, and it's a much harder one to deliver. We have a balancing act to perform because we have a duty to protect the rights of all citizens, and this can sometimes bring dissatisfaction on the part of one community. Where this does happen, I believe that we need to do two basic things. Firstly, we need to listen and learn, and we need to work with all parties to increase understanding of each other and to build trust. We're a learning organisation. West Midlands Police is a core value of ours, and so we have debriefed the events that took place at the university. We've worked closely with the university since the 3rd of December, and we've taken on board the feedback received to date to try to develop our future responses in partnership with the university, students and staff. We will continue to do this when we have the results of the other investigation. Secondly, as public servants, we should be held accountable if we get it wrong. Accountability for the police is via our Chief Constable and to the Police and Crime Commissioner, who has been elected to represent all of you. Officers are also personally accountable, like citizens, for their actions and can be held accountable by the law if they breach it. So let me try and answer some of the specific questions. Have any officers been sanctioned, and when will the investigations be completed? We've already discussed the IPCC investigation. There's no timescale for completion at the moment, but they have spoken to a number of complainants and witnesses. They've not spoken to the officers, but this is usually at the latter end of the process. No officers have been suspended. This is a decision following an assessment by our Professional Standards Department, and it's an issue that remains under review throughout the investigation. Do police have any codes of conduct, generally or on campus or for protests? Well, yes, the police have a code of conduct, a code of ethics, which is the guide to how we should behave in all situations. We also guided, as I've mentioned, by the law, by human rights legislation. So when officers use force, it must be legal, proportionate and justifiable. I've already mentioned that officers have a personal responsibility through their decision-making to justify their actions. This is, in essence, the focus of the investigation by the IPCC. So why were officers armed with CS spray and taser? All officers receive personal safety training, which includes how we deal with the use of force against either ourselves or others safely. We all carry a radio, handcuffs, baton and CS spray. CS spray is not pepper spray, and it's a nationally approved product. A small number of officers in each team carry taser. This again is nationally approved, and it can only be carried by specially trained officers. Officers use a decision-making model to determine the least intrusive option to manage the threat posed, taking into account all of the circumstances. So what lessons have been learnt? One of the key things that's been developed since the event in December is an attendance protocol. Further, the planned protest that took place on the 4th of December, which presented more threat and risk, was managed jointly by the police and the university, and is a good example of working together. Been hopeless with the time. To consider the best interests of student, protesters and university staff. The main aim is to have a proportionate and graduated police response. Of note in this on the 4th of December was the use of the protest liaison officers, which received favourable feedback from both the university students and management in linking with the students' union and students on the day. We've also worked closely with the university to make sure that we're sharing all relevant, or that all of us are sharing relevant information about planned protests and demonstrations, so that we can risk assess and ideally ensure that where possible protests are planned rather than spontaneous. This approach assists in determining if a police presence is required, and if so, what presence. Finally, I just wanted to briefly mention the presence of police on campus generally and how we work with the university. You want me to carry?
Just a few final words on that.
It was just really to say that we are focused particularly on the police role in protest. That is a tiny part of what we do on the university campus. We have a dedicated university officer at Warwick University who spends most of her time focused on student support around crime prevention matters and student welfare. Road safety has been a local priority, particularly around the roads of Warwick University and for international students. And student support involving the university officer is a daily matter in terms of dealing with student welfare issues. Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to move on to hear from representatives of Warwick for Free Education, and that's Callum Camp and Hope Worsdale.
Firstly, a factual account of events. On December 2nd, a delegation of Warwick for Free Ed activists attempted to occupy Chancellor Suite 1 ahead of a national day of action in support of free education. We entered the building at 10 p.m, assuming the staff had left. When we arrived, we found that there were members of staff present, and we explained the situation to them and asked them to leave via an accessible exit. They refused, and a confrontation began, where a member of staff threw a student to the floor and assaulted another. Security arrived and told this member of staff to leave. Protesters decided to break the occupation due to concerns for their safety and the presence of staff. The next day, on the National Day of Action, Warwick for Free Ed held a 40-strong demo outside Senate House, comprising of speeches and a banner drop. Following this, we decided to stage a sit-in in the foyer of Senate House and host a non-obstructive seminar on free education. As we entered the building, security tried to forcibly stop us, but we went round them. At some point during this sequence, it is alleged that a security guard was assaulted. No one that took part in this sit-in witnessed this or has seen any evidence that confirms this. It wasn't until hours after the sit-in that we were even made aware of this allegation. The arrival of the police was not anticipated by any prior warning or discussion with Warwick security. Upon entering, the police advanced towards the crowd and proceeded to mass assault us. Collectively, we were pushed in the chest, thrown to the floor, grabbed by the throats, sprayed with CS gas and threatened with tasers. It was a terrifying and emotionally damaging experience which has had a significant impact on both the mental well-being and general welfare of the protesters. And this is especially true for the 3 who were violently arrested and placed under very restrictive bail conditions that separated them from campus and community. The next day, around 1,000 people gathered for a Cops Off Campus demo in response to the police violence. After 40 minutes of speeches, the crowd attempted forced entry to Senate House, which failed. Then the crowd proceeded to Roots Building, where around 250 people occupy part of the top floor and democratically formed initial demands to management. This marked the start of an 8-day-long occupation of this space. During this time, an injunction banning occupation-style protests indefinitely was served, and 2 named students were presented with the possibility of unlimited legal costs. Occupiers forced a negotiations meeting with management, which was utterly farcical, and on Friday the 12th, occupiers left the space. To address specific concerns from the survey, Senate House has historically been a key target for direct action dating back to the birth of the university and holds symbolic value as the location of the council chamber. It is generally preferred to University House as the latter is highly securitized and isolated. Protesters occupied Roots Building to reclaim a space for self-organisation, discussion and recovery from December 3rd. Being in a space used for corporate conferences allowed us to apply economic pressure on management, who had consistently refused to engage with other tactics. This space is again symbolic, as it was an occupation of the Roots Building in the 70s, which won the demand of an SU building, which is such a key part of our university today. We are part of the worldwide student movement, and we recognise the right of members of our movement to be involved across institutions and borders. We campaign for both local and national goals, and therefore we think it is totally justified that we receive support on both a local and national scale. On December 3rd, a few members of the student movement from the local community came to support our cause, and at the Cops Off Campus demo, there were activists from Birmingham, Coventry, Oxford, London, Sussex, Manchester, Nottingham and Cambridge, and we are proud that our struggle gained such broad support. We are concerned that university management are fabricating and spreading a perception that Warwick For Free Ed is a violent organisation committed to assaulting members of staff in order to delegitimise our protest. We stand in solidarity with staff, be it academic staff facing a 15% real pay cut, casualised staff effectively paid less than the minimum wage, and the 241 members of staff, including Warwick Conference staff, paid less than the living wage. And we have campaigned on these issues before, and we will continue to do so. We have no intention of threatening or harming staff. They are part of our university and part of our movement. We should not give in to a manufactured division between us. Unfortunately, universities have often responded to legitimate protests with disciplinary action. Most notably at Birmingham, Sussex and University of London, internal sham courts have suspended students and seriously damaged their mental health and life prospects as punishment for daring to dissent. We know Warwick is capable of doing this after taking students to court. Similarly, we know that the police keep extensive files on legitimate protesters, labelling them domestic extremists and placing them under surveillance. In the face of these 2 threats, some students have understandably decided to protect their identities by wearing masks. This is not a crime and is a rational response to police and university repression. We absolutely defend the right of individuals to protect themselves in this way.
We've got limited time.
Time.
The university purports to support democracy. This isn't true. During occupation negotiations, they told us to use democratic channels, and yet the highest forms of student and staff representation are treated with absolute contempt by university management. To focus only on our students' union, we democratically support free education, a better pay deal for staff, a more democratic university structure, lower living costs on campus, and have expressed no confidence in Sir Nigel Thrift. These are all policies supported by a democratic majority, and what have the university done in response? Not much, right? Active campaigns which follow the structures the university advocates end up ignored and frustrated. Look at Fossil Free, who stood outside earlier demanding to be heard. The survey responses are clear. There's an overwhelming expression of the university in crisis. Management and the power structures represented by the university as a whole have presided over the collapse of democratic legitimacy. Ideas with mass support are clearly being ignored, and this situation cannot be allowed to continue. When the normal function of the university becomes authoritarian and damaging to the very community that supports it, that function must not go unchallenged. This is why protests erupt. We, and by we I mean our generation, our organisation and our campus, feel that protesting is the only way in which we can achieve anything. 1,000 came along to the demo on December the 4th in an unprecedented display of political will. If the university wants to move beyond this impasse, they should listen to the democratic structures of our community, primarily student and staff unions, and act on that basis. If they continue trying to ignore us, we will be forced to continue taking action, which means they cannot ignore us. This is the logic behind disruptive protest. It's a last resort which emerges only in response to the failure of other mediating channels. As a result, we absolutely reaffirm the right of the disempowered to disrupt the protests or the processes which disempower and damage them. As we've explored, we have no democratic power. But alongside this, the continued functioning of the university is hurting us. We are subjected not only to the immediate violence of December the 3rd, but also slower and more insidious forms of violence, such as an average debt burden of £44,000 per person upon graduation. All right. The students of Warwick University are all victims of this economic violence, which sells our future short in order to dispossess us. We think the events of last December have to be understood in the context of UK higher education as a whole. The introduction of a neoliberal agenda has fundamentally changed the way in which universities work. This environment has led to dissenting students and staff facing extreme repression. Kettling, assault, arrest, disciplinary procedures, injunctions and the like have become a normal part of dealing with protest on campus. Warwick now has its own plainclothes security officers to act as a secret police. There is an assault on the right to protest, which is taking place on a wide scale as a direct consequence of a vicious programme which seeks to turn education into a business, students into employable graduates, and the police into the paramilitary enforcers of passivity.
And finally, what have we learned? Well, we've learned to not be confident on our own campus. We've learned to not trust the police. We've learned what a taser sounds like. We've learned what CS gas smells like. And above all, we have learned that the right to protest should be defended at all times and in all places.
Thank you.
So I didn't interrupt because the speakers were in full flow, but we have asked that people don't film the event. We've got a film that will capture the full events at the end. So
I'm happy to be asked to leave, but if I stay here, I want to continue filming.
I'm afraid that we have made it clear, and we have agreed with all the participants in this process, I'm sorry, but there is an official film of this event that can be made available to all Warwick staff and students at the end. We have the basis on which we've got this panel here today is that there is that official film and there won't be any other filming of the event. So I am really sorry, and I would like you to stay, but if you are taking that position, I am going to have to ask you to leave, and I'm sorry about that.
That's fine.
Okay? Right, I'm going to move on. So we're next going to hear from, again, splitting their time of 8 minutes. We're going to hear from Deputy Registrar Joe Horsberg, who's in overall responsibility for security issues on the university campus, and from Mark Kennell, who's Head of Security Operations.
Okay, thank you. Oh, that's a bit. The parts of the survey that I've been asked to speak to relate to the operational matters concerning security and processes around protests on campus. I'm joined by Mark Kennell, Head of Security Services, and between us we will try and answer as many of the questions we can on the survey in the time that we've been given. So we're going to take questions and basically make responses to those. We've already heard that our ability to say anything specific on the actual events of the 3rd of December is actually quite limited due to the fact that there's a live process ongoing. So please be aware that we will say what we can, but we may not be able to answer all questions that might come forward.
People have queries about why the police were called to campus that day. They were called in response to a member of the security team reporting that they had been assaulted, had sustained an injury and wished to make a complaint. It will be for the courts to decide whether what took place was an assault, so I'll make no further comment on that. It is important to note that the police were not called to campus because there was a protest. There have been queries about whether that member of staff was a contract member of staff. I can answer that, yes he was. We often use contract staff to deal with peaks in resourcing. There are a number of companies we can and have used, but we tend to use Atlas Security, all of whose officers are trained to national standards, and all of whom work as a core part of the security team while they are contracted to us. They receive the same briefings as the rest of the security team and the same duties. Another question on the survey is who called the police. I did as the Head of Security Services on receipt of that allegation of assault from that staff member. That's standard procedure whenever it is believed that a crime could have been committed on campus and there is a complainant. The alleged perpetrator was still on campus, was not recognisable as a Warwick person, so there was no way of identifying that person to enable a follow-up later. We don't have jurisdiction to deal with a potential criminal offence any other way. Any member of the university community, or indeed the public, can call the police at any time. The university is not a closed community, as this protest has demonstrated.
Just to cover off two other specific questions. In terms of the question regarding the support offered to people impacted by any of the events, we have a student support service, and that was referenced in the communications that were sent after the event, and people who may have been impacted, both staff and students, were able to access that service. Regarding free legal support, there is no free legal advice offered through the university on the matter. We've already heard through CAT about the services offered through the student union. But as I say, pastoral support is available and offered through student support, and that's the same as available for a student with any issue.
I'll now cover a bit more about the security team to answer those questions in the survey. The Security Services Operations team comprises of 39 staff and a Security Services Manager Operations, all directly employed on indefinite contracts. They work on a 3-shift pattern covering every 24-hour period. In terms of who is responsible for security operations and how security staff are held accountable, I lead the overall security service for the university, and I report through to Joe as Deputy Registrar. Security staff are held accountable in the same way as any other member of staff through the relevant HR policies and procedures. There were questions raised about training for the security team. The university voluntarily complies with the Security Industry Authority through door supervision accreditation and licensing for its frontline staff. We do this to provide reassurance to the university community that staff are well trained. The SIA are an independent body reporting to the Home Secretary and have been regulating private contract security operatives since the introduction of the Private Security Industry Act in 2001. Universities are not obliged to have this accreditation unless they are working as door supervisors within a licensed premises, but we choose to do it. In addition, we have staff who are trained in close protection and crime prevention.
People have asked whether there's a code of conduct or a protocol for security staff regarding protest and interaction with students, and if so, what does it say? What powers are security given? There are documents that already exist on the Security Services website which states what colleagues and students can expect of the security team and outlines what the security team do. This has been around for some time. Prior to the 3rd of December protest, we'd already had discussions with the SU about updating this further into a code of conduct, and we're looking at that, and we're quite happy to consider that. Mark's been doing some work to see where there might be some other templates that we can look at as well in that regard. The documents on the website already talk about how members of the community can help security staff in their roles, and this will need updating to reflect the kinds of behaviour mutually expected. Coming on to Regulation 29, which Ken has already referred to, this covers the provision of free speech and governs how meetings and gatherings on campus should proceed. It has a number of provisions within to ensure the safe conduct of meetings in order to protect free speech and free expression. Unfortunately, protest activities are not always notified in advance and don't always follow the provisions of Regulation 29. Therefore, the security team are often having to respond to dynamic situations that are unplanned. The suggestion of a code of conduct for protests, therefore, is helpful in terms of the security team. We have a lot of operational detail to support this already in Regulation 29. Future peaceful protests within the law will only be success if it encompasses expected behaviours of staff and all protesters, internal and external to the university. Another question was whether any protocol that covers the actions of protesters undermines the very nature of protest itself. In my view, any protocol must provide all involved parties with assurance that the protest will remain peaceful and lawful while upholding the fundamental right of freedom of speech and expression.
On the role of security more generally, there were questions about what security services do. Security services operate a people-led service. Most of what we do is to enable the staff, students and visitors to the campus to have a safe and secure experience. The Gatehouse is a port of call for anyone who needs help from people who have locked themselves out of their room, for example, to people who have been a victim of crime. It is a 24-hour operation. You'll find security colleagues assisting with the smooth running of graduation, open days, public lectures, student society events, dealing with incidents such as water leaks, gas main issues, fires in buildings, identifying and detaining burglars and other alleged criminals, carrying out safety and welfare checks on vulnerable individuals, carrying out crime prevention work, working with the police on these matters where appropriate, and assisting the community on road safety. Moving on, there were questions about how security staff are briefed before events. To answer that, security staff receive a formal briefing in the form of an operations order prior to any gathering or large event on campus including protests, if we are aware of them. This briefing contains information about how the event will be managed and what the perceived risks are. Where it relates to protest, every operations order states that peaceful protest is a right and that it will be conducted in accordance with University Regulation 29. The challenge, as Joe has already said, is that protest activities are not notified in advance. If we get to hear about them, then we will try and put in place mechanisms to ensure that people stay safe. Good examples of planned protests are days of strike action. The university is notified by the trade union in advance. We then engage with the leaders of the campus unions to understand their plans and put mechanisms in place to facilitate this. This usually involves making safe areas for pickets, for example, putting in places things like to prevent people from being inadvertently pushed into the road. We have, in the past, stopped the traffic on campus to facilitate a peaceful march. Everything passes off smoothly, as all of that advanced planning has been done between the university and the organisers. The university has always supported peaceful, lawful protest, and it will continue to do so. The aim is to ensure that the protest can pass off peacefully, safely for all concerned, and without disruption to other members of the community.
So we're coming to the end of our time, so I'll just summarise that I've got some points here about the fact that the security team have also facilitated peaceful protest in the past. And we as a university have the right to expect that we can carry out functions in a reasonable way without disruption. All security officers have the same rights as every member of the public in law. In terms of the question about what actions have been taken to ensure there will be no repeat of scenes during the December protests, I think everybody agrees that they are not scenes that we wish to see again. It is vital that university receives formal advance notice of planned protests so that we can acquire sufficient resources, so we can effectively facilitate those plans with those organisers. If it does not happen, then we are left to react to circumstances as they unfold. That is extremely challenging. Okay. I've also got some points here that I can talk to around protests that have happened since the 3rd of December, and we can also comment about our interaction with the police.
We'll finish the first half of the session by hearing from the Vice-Chancellor.
Okay, thanks. Thank you for your appreciation. Now, our university community is a lively one, and that's a good thing too. No one disputes that that's a good thing. It fosters and challenges ideas. It strives for excellence in all of its activities. It promotes dignity, respect and well-being, and it makes Warwick a welcoming place to study, work and visit. And why, in a sense, would we want anything else? Integral to all of that, of course, is the core value of freedom of expression. And our campus is a space in which differing viewpoints are tolerated, indeed encouraged, so long as they're lawful and lawfully expressed. And believe me, there are lots of very different viewpoints on campus. Of course, people will always disagree with each other. And there should be a forum in which opposing views could be heard, to some degree negotiated, understanding that at some point people will say, that's what I believe and that's all there is to it. We only need to consider the long history of peaceful protest at Warwick to see that such a forum has existed here. All students and staff have a right to freedom of expression and to impart and receive ideas. But of course, freedom of expression doesn't include a license to disrupt all of the activities of the university or jeopardise the safety of its members or engage in acts of criminal damage or violence, but then no one would think it would. Now, I recognise that not everyone appreciated the communications that we sent in the aftermath of the events of last term. And in retrospect, we know that there are all sorts of lessons that we can learn about that. And we'll reflect on that. The events of 3rd of December are subject to ongoing legal proceedings, however. It's not easy to go much beyond saying anything in that area. What is apparent, though, is a desire for different groups of students, not just the few groups of students here to be heard. And it's evident from the survey that some believe that the existing mechanisms for dialogue are failing in some respects. Now, I should say straight away, before we go any farther, the university has a hell of a lot of mechanisms for consulting with students. That is just a fact. We have probably one of the broadest representative structures of any university in this country when it comes to student participation. That too, I'm afraid, is just a fact. I'm proud that that's the case. And of course, you only have to look at the ways in which students are represented. Students' Union sabbaticals and other members are formal members of all of the key university committees. That's remarkable in terms of most British universities. That includes being trustees of the university via membership of the University Council. They are members of our Senate. They are represented on our steering committee. And on the Finance and General Purposes Committee, through which all of the university's financial business flows. They're members of our Estates Committee, where the university's capital and sustainability plans are developed. They see, if you like, the ebb and flow of business. Of that, there is no doubt. Now look, I could go on listing all the other things that students are actually on. Membership of the boards of the 4 faculties, Board of Undergraduate Studies, Board of Graduate Studies, Research Committee, Research Governance and Ethics Committee, Discipline and Discipline Appeals Committee, role on the Committees for Equality and Diversity and Health and Safety, even, as we're here, the Arts Centre Board. There are student representatives on every single one of those committees. Students have a voice on every one of those committees. And we include students also in terms of all of the strategic implementations that we're doing on the Warwick Alliance Group, on the development of a presence in California. Each and every case, students represented. And these are really fundamental things for the university before we go any farther. So I don't think there are really any areas in which students cannot have a voice if they wish to have it through the democratic structures that we have, which are mainly, of course, the Students' Union. Yeah, but actually one of the things about democracy is every now and then you have to realise that you do actually have to persuade enough people to actually vote for you. Anyway, in addition to the former routes, I've recognised that it's important to connect with the views of students more generally. We've done that without trying to undermine the SU. But for example, I hold student suppers a couple of times a year, each time. Yeah, and I've actually invited, for the last 2 years, not this year, representatives of the PPU to come to those suppers to tell me what their concerns are. No one's ever turned up. Now, fair enough, but you can't have it both ways when it comes to these kinds of things. So we really do try to open up the university to student representatives in all aspects of decision making. Now, of course, I recognise that all of these things are challenging, but at the same time it's worth making it clear that some of the demands that are put forward by some of the protesters are simply impossible to engage with. We do not have much in the way of influence on large numbers of national policies. Surprise, surprise. We're a relatively small institution in a very large pond. And there are a whole series of other issues of that kind. So to summarise, basically, do I want to see a repeat of the scenes experience in December? Obviously not. Why ever would that be the case? Do I want to see the university's operations disrupted? Of course not. There are people here who are making a living. Do I want to hear about members of our community being distressed or intimidated by the actions of the few? Of course I don't. Do I want to ensure that the core value of freedom of expression at Warwick is upheld? Yes, I do, but for actually everyone. Everyone. So how can we now move forward? We can move forward by continuing to work together, and indeed you've heard in previous moments a whole series of things that we're proposing to do. And that's important, I think. The one thing I would say, though, there has been a change in recent times, reflecting the prevalence of national campaigns, and the involvement of organised activists who are not connected to our campus. And that has been very difficult to cope with, actually. Of that there is no doubt. It's just a fact. And, of course, there have been some campaigns which have been exceptionally difficult to cope with. It's a pity, because in the last few years, Warwick has been an incredibly successful university. Many of you will probably have seen the World Reputation Table result today. But it's also a living community made up of many viewpoints, not just your viewpoint, many viewpoints. Let's keep it that way. We can do both at once.
Okay, so thank you to all of our speakers in the first half of the session, and thank you very much to all of you for keeping the time, which means that we do actually have an hour left, as originally planned, for questions from the floor. So what I'm going to just repeat what I said at the beginning, which is comments and questions from the audience. In order to hear from as many different voices as possible, I'm going to keep you to a minute each in terms of time. So similarly to as I've done with the speakers, I will stop you after a minute, and I hope that people do help me with that. If you can say who you are and what part of the university you come from, that's great. You can ask for clarifications on past events, but as people have said, there are lots of the issues that may not be able to be addressed here today. There are also some ideas for what people might think in the future, and we'd like to hear more from the audience on that score. What do you as a community want to see done differently in the future? We certainly had some issues raised around communication generally, and around codes of conduct also springs to mind. So please feel free to comment on those ideas and raise your own ideas about what should happen in the future beyond what has been raised by the panel. Okay? So I'm now going to open things to the floor, and I'd like to see a show of hands of the numbers of people who would like to speak. What I'm going to do is take people in bunches of threes, and we'll start down the front here, the lady here. Now, we have 2 roving mics going around, so if you could wait until you get the mic, because then our audience on the video can hear you as well.
Well, so I'd like to comment on what Ken Sloan said. You said that the protests cost £31,000 to the university. So approximately, Warwick has more than 20,000 students, as far as I know. So that would be less than £1.5 per student. I'm paying £9,000 for the university each year, and I think I will be very happy to contribute £1.5. And I think as a student of Warwick, I should have the right to say about at least 6,000 of what I paid to the university. So I think the cost of the protest really shouldn't be a very important argument against it.
Thank you. So I'm going to dot around the room. So I'm going to have someone from the back now. I've got a lady with a hand up in the middle at the back. If the microphone could be passed back there, please.
Hi everyone. I'm a lecturer in the history department. I found out about the attacks on students in December. Initially on the evening when they happened, because personal tutees of mine started emailing me expressing how upset they were about the attacks on their fellow students. And I then met a number of them the next day and continued these conversations. I say this because what I don't want me to be forgotten here is that as teachers, as members of staff at this university, we have a duty of care to our students, and I would really like to hear from the panel whether they think that duty of care was met in December in 2014. I'm a bit worried that those attacks are kind of, to some extent, being normalized as a kind of tussle between staff and students. We shouldn't forget, this is a very, very extreme and unprecedented level of violence that occurred by the police against students in our university. Warwick has become famous for all the wrong reasons. Tasers have never been taken out against students on a UK campus before. CS gas, the police broke their own rules when they used CS gas in December. It's not supposed to be sprayed within 1.25 meters. It was sprayed much closer than that. So I think that we need to be clear that a dangerous precedent was set during these events, and we need to move forward to ensure that that is not repeated.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I have someone from over here? Can I? Oh, there's a gentleman there. Another gentleman over there, please.
Do you want me to stand up?
You can, whatever you feel most comfortable.
I'll stay sitting if I can. I had a question for Ken Sloan. In fact, a couple of related questions. Can you confirm, first of all, that occupation-style protest is now banned indefinitely at the university? If the university has indeed arrogated these extraordinary powers to itself, what do you mean when you state that you hope that the terms of the injunction will never have to be invoked? Are we to understand by this that the university is now committed to dealing with protest on a case-by-case basis, or are you simply hoping that students in future will behave?
Right. So, Ken, there's two questions I think directed at you specifically,
Yeah.
and then we'll ask anyone else on the panel to comment.
Yeah, so individuals in the audience who don't think that any amount of money relating to the university's expenditure on, and around disruption of protests are never going to agree with the view where I say that actually I think it's important. We are put under significant amount of scrutiny and pressure on a regular basis from lots and lots of different stakeholders about the way in which the revenue and the resources of the university are used. And we believe that we should be using those resources for the purposes for which we are here. And I don't think it's necessary to have to face those sort of losses in that sort of way. But I accept that different people will have a different view. And I'm sure if I was to, and I'm sure people who are listening, there will be as many people who have that view. There'll be plenty of people who don't have that view at all. And but there will be a difference of opinion. On the issue of the occupation, we will continue to deal with the policy around protests. We'll continue to deal with protests on a case-by-case basis. That is what we will do. That is what we have always done. So there is not clearly what's been called for in terms of the survey is a clarification of what the role and position of the security services would be. We've heard earlier on around reviews and consideration around procedures regarding the police, etc., and how they deal with reactions to come to campus. But we can't just assume that every single interaction that we have is going to be the same. And the only thing that we've asked for, accepting that there are plenty of people in the audience who will express an opposing view, is that if we can work with individuals in order to be able to facilitate protest on a peaceful basis, then we will continue to do that. But we have to accept, though, that cannot be at any cost, and it can't just simply be left open so that all of the normal activities of the university are completely disrupted.
So I'm going to go for the panel left to right this time, and we'll do right to left the next time in terms of commenting more generally. I suppose the issue of duty of care was the one that was for everyone, I think.
Oh, so do we think it was upholded? No. Not at all. I don't know.
I mean, it's quite obvious that when the university responded, right, the first email Nigel sent out was something along the lines of, you know, there's been this assault, this terrible assault on security guards, which absolutely happened. But we can't talk about what happened to security and police because that's all alleged and we have to wait for the investigations. I mean, there's a clear privileging of certain forms of knowledge one over the other, right? Whereas if it's done by someone in high-vis jackets, you need an investigation before you can declare the result of it. Whereas if it's done by a student, you can just off the bat say, no, illegal, they were assaulting people, blah, blah, blah. So if a duty of care means paying equal attention to all voices in the community, and if it means, you know, condemning people who use CS gas and tasers on your own students, I think it's quite obviously not been followed.
So the question about duty of care. So I think from our perspective, we did what we could for the protesters who were in that situation. Do I think that the university upheld a duty of care towards students? Not sure.
Let me be very clear. We have a duty of care. It's limited because students are adults, and so they're not like school kids or something of that kind. And we need to be very careful, therefore, to understand that. At the same time, it's also clear that so far as the events of December were concerned, in retrospect, there were certain things we might have done a bit differently. But those are things that we cannot do much about at this point. It's a retrospective thing that we have learnt from.
We can have further questions from the floor in a moment, but if we can let people finish their responses, and then we have more than 50 minutes left. There will be plenty of time for people to ask questions in a moment.
I'd just like to comment that we have extremely good and very, very well regarded student support services. Those that know Shirley and her team, I'm sure, value very much the support that they get from that service, and that service is always available to people. It's very difficult when you're in a dynamic situation and maybe you can't identify everybody, but the offer of student support is always there, and Shirley is always available to be able to support students who need it, whatever their circumstance and whatever the situation they find themselves in. And I would say that those services are always available to people.
I'm just going to let Kat come back on that specific issue before we go back to the floor again.
Just say that I think that, yeah, students do a really good job, but I think there should have definitely been some communication around the time of, like, this is available to you. You know, you will have been badly affected by this because you had CS spray in your face. Like, there should have been some clearer communication to say that student support was available.
So I have the lady down here at the front. And then, at the back there.
Hi, I'm Vedu. I'm a finalist of English Lit and Mandarin. And I know that we continually emphasize the point that we're all adults here, but the fact is that physical violence was used. So I think the analogy is appropriate of when you're fighting with your younger sibling over a toy and you accidentally hurt him really badly. So what you should do then is give him the toy. And a lot of time, money, physical energy, and intellectual energy has been spent on, you know, the aftermath of the kerfuffle with us, and maybe now you could please help us make a nice strategy and business plan for how Britain can achieve free education, because like that's what we were protesting for. So thank you.
So there's a lady at the back, right at the back there.
Oh, shit,
yeah.
that was the Nigel Smith.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask whether CS gas has ever been used against you, because I just came from Turkey to the UK for my postgraduate education, and in Turkey I've been to many peaceful protests where I've been criminalized for many, many times. I've never been involved in violence, but that has been done to me, and I've been subject to CS gas for many times, and I know how it feels. It feels like suffocating. It's really a form of torture. And you're doing this on your own campus. What I haven't been subjected to in Turkey was that I've never been subjected to CS gas on my own campus. We had an occupation that lasted 80 days in the center of the campus. And both academic staff and also students attended. And nobody has ever violently intervened. That's because our rector didn't let the police come inside the campus. Because in Turkey, autonomy of the university is held quite important. And if your rector says no to the police, legally they cannot go inside. So my question is it possible to have such a regulation here on our campus? I don't know the legal regulations in the UK exactly. I'm sorry for that. But can we say that the police will never intervene on campus again like this? First. Second, the students will never be CS gassed afterwards. That's my question.
Lady in the middle, in the black, she's putting her hand up.
Hi, I'm a lecturer in the English department, and I also first heard about this event from my students who were also quite distressed, as were many of my colleagues in the English department. And we were distressed because for us, many of us became teachers and academics because we believe that the role of the university is to foster the next generation of citizens. And we think that the way that happens is by fostering and protecting our students as they learn to get involved with the university as a democratic institution. And this for us means getting involved with the university in the student union. It means critiquing the university. It means sometimes protesting the university. And sometimes it means disrupting. especially when what we're disrupting is the things that are most disruptive to the institution of the university, which is privatization and rising tuition fees. My minute is up. I think that is our job as faculty members and administrators, is to protect students when they're engaging in those processes, and we have failed to protect our students, and that means we have absolutely failed. And I would like to call on the administration to join me in apologizing to students for failing to protect them.
So I think we have one question about free education that's directed at the Vice-Chancellor, and then again I will go down the panel from the opposite direction, asking everybody else to give their responses to the questions around CS gas and police presence on campus, and the issue of disruption of the university and the apology. Thank you.
So, strategy for free education. That's extremely easy and extremely difficult, both at the same time. You would have to convince the electorate that that's what they wanted. So listen, going on from that, the one thing I do know is that that means getting out into communities and actually convincing people about that. On campus, protesting about free education, I can tell you now, will have little effect on national policy. What you need to do instead is to get involved in mainstream political processes. I'm sorry, I know it's boring, but it's also true.
We're going to let people respond. There are lots of people with hands up, and if I do let people back and forth, we won't get to hear from as many voices as we'd like to. So if we could go down the panel responding to, I mean, people can talk about the free education issue if they'd like, but certainly the other questions that were raised, I think were for everyone on the panel.
I think you said something there, James, about police presence on campus, and of course nobody wants to see CS gas used. It's not something that anybody would want to see. But I do think it's worth reflecting that we have a very, very positive and supportive relationship through our campus police officer, who does an awful lot for an awful lot of people. The road safety work, the prevention of burglary, the cycle thefts, all of those kind of things. The campus police officer is available on student orientation and is there basically for people to go to. And I think it would be really, really unfortunate and really quite sad actually if we sort of put the whole sense of our police engagement on the back of that incident that people feel strongly about. We have got a very, very strongly supportive person on campus who supports all of us, and I think we should acknowledge that.
In relation to CS spray, I absolutely understand the frustration that we can't go into the details in relation to the use of it on the 3rd of December. Factually, what I can say is that every police officer in the country carries certain protection equipment. That's agreed through the rules and regulations of this country, and that's authorised for us to carry it. And CS spray is one of those pieces of personal protection equipment. We're all trained in it, and as I've already said, we have to justify the use of it, and that's what we're waiting, and that is the purpose of the IPC's investigation, because of both the police's own referral to them, but also because of complaints that have been made. And we'd have to wait and see what they say about that use. I've already gone through the basics of what the law says, but each officer in choosing to use force has to do so only if they're justified, necessary, and it's legal. And I can't say anything about whether on the 3rd of December that was the case, because it's unfair. It's unfair for the students, and it's also unfair for my officers. So in terms of police presence on campus, we've already heard about the dedicated police officer, but generally our duty as police officers in the City of Coventry is to keep the whole city safe. So through the University of Warwick are a number of public roads. The public have access to many parts of the campus, and any member of the public or any member of yourselves can call us, and it's our duty to respond to that. So in a very general sense, then there is always going to be an obligation on us and a requirement for us to come onto campus at times. When it comes to the policing of protests, and I mean policing in the broadest sense, then we've already talked about where the planning of events can mean that there is the minimal requirement, where possible, for the police to be present. It is certainly not my desire for us to be policing every protest at the university, and I don't think it's for anyone in this room. But where we can plan and work together and understand the risk around a protest, then that's in everyone's interest, not least the protesters who want to share and voice their views.
Did you want to say anything else about? Yep.
Okay, so does the union support free education? Absolutely. Does the union support police being off campus entirely? Well, we don't have a clear mandate to talk about that. I think what we would say is that we would rather police wasn't on campus when there's a protest, but we would want police to enter campus, say, if there are fascists. So, you know, there is that to consider, I suppose.
Yeah. I suppose colleague to my left made a point about the fact that certain aspects of information are in the public domain and certain aren't, and the fact that we do have some information, or at least allegations which are being looked at through criminal matters, will frustrate people because we can't refer to them. The starting premise, though, for a lot of the points that have been made about the incident seems to be that the allegation of assault, I don't know whether people are saying it didn't happen or that they didn't know it happened, or what, I don't know what the official position is, but the point is, the starting point for the university in terms of its action was an allegation of assault was made and the police were called to it. Until the process of concluding whether an assault has taken place has actually happened, it is very, very difficult to say that. But there does seem to be some sort of presumption that that allegation of assault should just have been ignored. And I don't know how that is the case. I don't know how it is the case that we can be seen to protect the interest of the whole community if we start by saying, well, an individual who says that something has happened, we just ignore it. And I don't think that's possible. I don't think that's feasible. The allegation was made, a call was made, and a series of events happened afterwards. Once we get to the end of the full investigation, the criminal investigation, we'll have the basis on which we'll be able to present all of the facts. And I welcome the fact of what Claire said before, that we could well have an opportunity to come back together and look at it again.
Yeah, just picking up on that point, so I wasn't actually aware that the appropriate use of force for responding to a call of assault was 6 police officers armed with CS gas, tasers and dogs, so I'll bear that in mind in the future. I would just like to thank the lady at the back for sharing your experience of CS gas in Turkey. I'm really sorry you had to go through that, and your struggle is our struggle, so we stand in solidarity with you. I'd just like to share with everyone that I received a call from Amnesty International, like the most established human rights organisation in the world. I received a call from them the next day saying, we're very concerned about what happened yesterday, because there have been cases in the past where when CS gas has been used, which is flammable, and a taser has been engaged, people have died. People have actually died in that situation, and those police officers, facilitated by our security, put us in that situation. I don't think we can forget that. And I would also like to say to Nigel, you've condemned one way but not another. You were perfectly happy in your email to condemn an alleged assault that took place, which is still unproven, but you still did not comment on the tens of YouTube videos that we have of police officers committing mass assault on students, many of which were not involved in this alleged assault. So I think that impartiality has totally gone out the window there, and I think that I demand you to apologise. I absolutely demand you to apologise.
Can
It's also worth noting that Turkey, Brazil, Chile and Greece all have cops off campus policies. It is possible, so don't sit there and pretend like it's not, because it is.
Can I quickly come back on the free education question? Nigel's been very quick to say that, you know, like, we're radicals, we don't represent everyone. Well, free education policy has been on the books for a long time, and the reason we had a demonstration on December 3rd was because the Russell Group, who actually do have some considerable power, are supporting raising fees to 16 grand. And Nigel here wasn't raising a whisper, you know, left-wing critical academic. supporting the increase in fees. So I think the idea that, you know, protesting on campus is utterly ridiculous. We can't do anything here. For a start, there are a number of key issues on campus, like staff pay. But also there are issues where you have real clout on a national scale, and to ignore that is frankly ridiculous. Also, in terms of cops off campus, I just want to make the point here, it's not just like people who like really, really hate the police. I've got a lot of family members who are police officers, right? I'm not like some crazy radical who just comes at this from a bizarre angle. Like, I have the empathy with the human side of the police, but the police are structurally oppressive. And that's a fact which is obvious to all of us. You know, when we say they look after all members of our community, I probably want to bracket the issue that police are structurally racist, so no, they don't. And also, I think we need to talk about the ways in which police being on campus brings in a structural role that we just don't want here. We don't want the paramilitary wing of the state resolving our disputes, right? That's not how we do things here. And there are plenty of countries that have a cops of campus policy and resolve their problems without using CS gas, tasers, dogs, riot vans, and the lot.
Then at the back. So have a front at the front here, and then at the back, and then we'll have the gentleman in the blue there.
First of all, I'd just like to note that the speech by Joe Horsburgh and Mark Kennel was actually within a minute extra, whereas the speech by Hope Worsdale and Callum Cant was actually 30 seconds less. My question is directed to Mark Kennel himself. On the day of the protests, it is claimed by the university that they communicated with the protesters. As someone who was there and as the person who Mark claims he spoke to, I have factual evidence that proves that he did not speak to me or any other protester about the presence of police, why they were there, or what they were going to do. And I'd like you, Mark, to confirm that. And there's also video evidence about police entering that room and not saying anything to the protesters or to, you know, the only people the police spoke to was Mark Kennel, right? And that's a problem. So I'd like you to confirm that, please. And I'd like you to apologise as a member of the university staff for informing the university that you had spoken to us, because you didn't, and that's just a lie.
So I asked, there was someone at the back who I pointed to, and now I can't see where you are. Sorry. There we go, yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, first of all, we raised the idea of a security code of conduct in October, so I'd like to ask why that hasn't been done already. Why has there been such a delay? And Nigel, you still haven't apologised, and if you're not willing to do it here, we're happy to invite you to a Warwick For Free Education supper so you can.
Sorry, I've got Mark, sorry, we're going to do it in threes, so I'm going to ask for one more question before we start. So I said, I missed green jumper, isn't it? Not blue. There we go. Okay. Sorry.
Hey, I'm Dan. I do maths. So the code of conduct thing you guys are talking about, this is for Joe and Mark, talking about how the code of conduct you're investigating templates should be right that we should look at maybe. I think the point of the code of conduct was that if they are if they're here to support us, if that's the role, if that's the mandate of security on campus, should their code of conduct, their mandate not be derived by democratic methods with consultation of staff and students primarily, and not by template with another university? We've already painted a picture of a repression across the board nationally, and it's not useful to go venturing to other universities to just hijack their repressive policies and implement them here. In what sense, I want to challenge some of the words you use, peaceful and lawful. If you have the financial clout to expand what lawful means, to criminalize protest that was previously civil disobedience or something like that, I'm talking about occupation here, obviously in December, then how can we really imbue lawful with any meaning if you have the financial clout to expand what that means and then force us into a position where we don't have any sort of legal remiss to actually disrupt the university structures, etc. And also, can you clarify what you think peaceful protest is? Because I don't see any problem with sit-ins and occupations. I don't think they're unpeaceful. I think they're necessarily the necessary methods of challenging a very corporate and difficult institution.
Thank you. Thank you. So Mark, do you want to start and then?
So to Miguel then, we'll just backtrack maybe halfway through the protest. Looking back further in history in terms of how we manage protests, so particularly with Senate House, we've been cautious in the past, and we've closed the postgraduate hub on grounds of safety in the past. We received some criticism for doing that at the time, and so what we did on this occasion, given that we had no intelligence or perceived threat that was going to be anything other than a normal peaceful protest at the university, we kept the postgraduate hub open on that day. Partway through the protest, I was getting concerned because it was getting quite loud in there. We've got the Christmas tree, trying not to knock the Christmas tree over. We were trying to keep a passage between the protesters and making sure that the postgraduate hub was kept open. Partway through that protest, I came over to you, Miguel, and said, I need a gentleman's agreement with you that you're not going to go and occupy the postgraduate hub. And with the plan, that we would leave the postgraduate hub and allow the university and Senate House in particular to function as well as we could during that protest. Is that correct?
We talked about it in the group, and we all agreed that PG Hall had to be kept open. Your security staff were blocking the entrance, and so we filmed your security staff blocking it, and we actually asked you to move so that people could get in and out of the PG Hub.
What I don't want to do is...
Is that the truth?
What I don't want to do is... Just let me speak. One of the things we need to do, the reason I'm pointing that, I don't want to get too pinned down on the postgraduate hub. It was a conversation between you and I. As somebody, I walked up to you and I said, I need a gentleman's agreement. When the police arrived sometime later, I went over, I ran across Senate Lawn to meet the police that were coming in the other direction. The conversation I had with them was around the fact that we've got a protest that's happening at the moment. We're happy for the protest to be continue, providing we can identify the individual that is alleged to have committed the assault, i.e. name, address, date of birth, and even just leave it at that, and pick that guy up after the event had taken place. I then said to the police officers, I just need a couple of minutes to go over to the protesters and have that conversation and say, we just need to identify that one individual.
Well, let you finish, please.
I approached the doors, Miguel, and I said to you, I looked at you in the face, and Callum sat, we've had this conversation before already, Callum, and I said to you, Miguel, I need to speak to you. And at that point, Callum comes across with his back to me and said, you don't need to speak to him, you don't need to say anything at all. And I said, Miguel, I need to speak to you. I need to speak to you. And you said, you don't need to say anything at all.
And I said that because usually when you try and speak to protesters, you're trying to intimidate them. So I think that's quite fair.
So we're going to move on from this issue because I don't think we're going to resolve it here on this panel. And I'm keen at the end, so people in the audience can start thinking about the future-orientated things that we need to do. So we're going to let the rest of the panelists respond to the questions that have been put. The rest of the summit process we have less than half an hour left. Some issues have been raised around communications and code of conduct, which people on the panel might want to further reflect upon, but I'd like more of that from people in the audience as well about moving forward. What is it you want to see happen in relation to protest in Warwick in the future? But before we do that, is there any other comments people have about the questions that have already been put? So definitions of peaceful protest, the issue of an apology, and a security code of conduct, I think, probably most relevant down that end of the table.
Okay, so in terms of the code of conduct, there's already a users charter on the security website. We've said already that we recognise that that has the benefit of being updated. Quite happy to do that. We had conversations before the 3rd of December event that would be beneficial to do, and we had conversations with the SU that we would work with them on that. So your point is fine. Yeah, we need to have an idea about the structure of these things, otherwise you get a rather waffly document that means absolutely nothing. But it is about trying to get something that is meaningful, and I'm quite happy to do that. In terms of the definition of peaceful protest, people have, we've already heard, people have freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom of assembly. Okay, so they are things that people can do, and they are enshrined in legislation. But effectively, that doesn't mean that the university doesn't have its own rights as well. And the university does have its own rights. The university has its rights to effectively be able to manage its business, occupy its own buildings and land without disruption. And effectively, that's what this balance is all about, is that there is a right to protest, there is a right to express your views, there is a right to come together to do that, but where effectively it prevents the university, the other members of the community, from getting on with their jobs, their activities, the things that they do, then no. And when it turns into something that effectively means that is an occupational protest. You use the words occupational protest. Well, that actually is an act of trespass because the university does not consent.
Could you wrap up there?
To that.
I want to focus on those issues of taking forward code of conduct and others. So, anything you say, Vice-Chancellor? Anything?
Peaceful protest, just to say, the peaceful protest is really the right of assembly without, if you like, there being a sense of intimidation. And that intimidation, of course, goes both ways. It has to be on one side to make sure that the protesters don't feel that, but also on the other side that the people who are affected in one way or the other, who are not part of the protest, also don't feel intimidated. I don't think we can say that that's happened all the time, if I can put it that way. Second thing to say, I just want to come back on free education. Look, free education is an entirely viable political goal, okay? I mean, why would I think that students might not want that, okay? That's not an issue, and I think it's bizarre to think that somehow the other we would want a constituency that did think that, you know, to somehow be told to be quiet. We've never said that. What we have said, going the other way though, is there are arguments the other way that free tuition fees, if you like no fees at all, is something which actually also is quite problematic in various ways. And I'm not sure that that argument will continue, okay? But the fact of the matter is that the problem that you've got is you're espousing a form of politics in which you know you're right, okay? And since no, you know you're right, and what you're going to do is say there's something in the way, we need to get rid of it. Now that is a form of politics, but it is a very corrosive form of politics, and I would advise you against it personally because it produces exactly levels of acrimony which become very, very difficult to work with. And there's absolutely no reason. That's why we have things like negotiation and these kinds of things. It's why we're trying to do these kinds of events, because we're quite happy to talk to students about these things and take their views into account when we can. We're also willing to explain why some of those views, frankly, are out with the birds at this point in time.
Kat, would you want to add to that?
Just quickly about the code of conduct, the security code of conduct. It's something that we've been talking about since term 1 of this year, raised with Mark and Ken and Joe, you know, in term 1, and then there was policy passed in term 2 by all students to say this was something that they wanted. I really want this to happen quicker. I'm sad it's not finished already, and I really hope we can get something for the start of term 3, ideally.
So with regard to the code of conduct, I see no reason why we wouldn't want to put a draft out for consultation and invite comments. So I think it would be absolutely fine for us to put out a draft of the code of conduct out to consultation. Obviously the student unions are main conduit for students. We also have to take account of the fact that that consultation to take the views of all staff. Ultimately though, the views that come back are going to be different and sometimes are going to be contradictory, and we will have to use the mechanisms of the university in order to approve it. It would have to go through the normal committee structure which the student union would be represented. But in terms of seeking views and thoughts on it, I see no reason whatsoever why that can't be put out to open consultation.
Yeah, I just want to talk a bit about the idea of disruption. So, protest is reliant upon disruption. That's how protest works. This is evident in every example of a successful movement. When a union goes on strike, it disrupts its workplace. When civil rights activists boycotted buses, they disrupted the bus companies. Fracking activists engaging in blockades have driven off energy companies, and in a context similar to our own, Quebec students who went on a strike to oppose a fee rise essentially shut down Montreal. It works. It is a thing. Do not attempt to delegitimize it. We reserve the right to use disruptive tactics because in our understanding of history, disruption is an essential form of action which can be used by people who are otherwise disempowered against people in positions of authority. We do not have institutional authority. We do not have institutional power. That is why we use disruptive tactics. That said, our objective is not to stop education functioning, and in fact, our long-term goal is to stop the university and the government perpetrating much larger acts of disruption against education, i.e. high fees, soaring living costs, and a very restrictive neoliberal curriculum. And let me make it clear, when staff were laid off by university, casualised workers who were laid off by university as a result of the December occupation, this highlighted the university's disregard for precarious workers, a disregard which sits alongside a willingness to pay Sir Nigel 350 grand a year and hiring outsourced security to bully protesting students. This is a rich university. That did not have to happen. That was a deliberate tactic by management. It was not because of the occupation.
Okay, I think what would be really interesting was to talk to the managers we've got here about their understanding of the history of Warwick, and see how they understand peaceful protests in our history. Like Nigel said, the right of assembly without intimidation. I think if you actually looked at the occupation, when the injunction was bought for tens of thousands of pounds, you would have really struggled actually to see intimidation. It was a group of students who were otherwise disempowered taking back a space, and that is a tactic which historically has been essential to our university. That's how we got an SU building, it's how we fought the high rents and roots. It is part of our history, and as Warwick students we should be damn proud of it, because actually not many universities have such an amazing history of resistance against what is often very, well, not quite neoliberal at that point, right, but very authoritarian modes of control. And also the fantastic point where someone mentioned negotiation. If you want to know how seriously this university takes dialogue, listen to those leaked tapes, right? Listen to the recording of that negotiation, because it's a farce, right? And they're pretending, you've got to listen to more diverse opinions. Well, look at the SU policy. It supports everything we want, right? It supports free education. It supports the democratic structures. It supports higher staff pay. It supports living costs. And it says no confidence in Nigel Thrift, right? So all of that is in the most representative form we have it, right? So when we have these demands, they are not listened to. We reserve the right to disrupt. And I think the buying of an injunction is the most profound example of how this university is not interested in negotiation whatsoever.
So we have 20 minutes left. And what I want to hear from any questions that are raised now is ideas for how we can bridge these gaps, how we can move things forward, what we can do differently in the future. So if people have concrete ideas that they would like to propose, that they would like to put forward to build on what's been said in the panel or something different, then that's what I want to hear. Gentleman here in the middle. Yeah.
Thanks very much. Keith Richards, Applied Linguistics. Looking back, this is an institution with, I think, excellent systems. Where it's failed here for me is in the humanity of the situation, and I'm with my academic colleagues on this. But looking forward, we have a film. There's a recording of these exchanges. I'd like to ask both sides to look very carefully at that recording and at their responses to one another. I'd like to ask Free Education to ask yourself seriously to what extent you've closed down some of the spaces available to those that you're discussing this with. And to the Vice-Chancellor, I'd like to ask you to look at yourself and ask to what extent, verbally and non-verbally, your responses could be seen as patronising. Because without mutual respect, we do not go forward.
Okay. So we have, I'm going to ask a gentleman there at the back. And yeah, there at the back, yeah.
I'm Cedric and I'm a law student. I'd like to make it clear to those who have forgotten that trees and doors are not sentient beings. We are talking about human beings, people. How can you complain about these things when the well-being of students are at stake? People are being intimidated and repercussions are being faced. I'm even scared a bit talking now because I've met some of you on the senior management and I've seen some of you, and one of you, Ken, I saw you talking to the ladies in the law reception. You're a good person. The things you were saying to them were good, and my heart was warmed because sometimes I feel that they're not appreciated as much as they are. I bring them cookies all the time. But how, with that in mind, can we consider doors and trees as more important or more valuable than the well-being and the feeling of safety of human beings? It is beyond me. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, a lady down here at the front.
My name's Alice.
Sorry, can you just wait for the... Sorry, just so that people on the video can also hear you.
Yeah, my name's Alice. I'm a second-year English student. This is to Mark Cannell. Somewhere along the panel there was a complaint that students took photo of your staff or your security members without their consent. However, as recently as 2 hours ago at the fossil fuel divestment protest. There were your plainclothes security guards taking photos of us without our consent. Would you like to comment on this hypocrisy, please?
Can I ask, I just want to ask my co-director Andrew Williams, who's standing at the back, who's been monitoring what's been happening via our comment box on the video, whether there's anything wants to add at this stage.
Yes, there's a lot of commentary that's coming online. There's one specific question that hasn't been addressed. A lot of other questions are being asked, but it's about the use of CS gas and how unusual it was that night, comparison with the police use of that particular weapon in other circumstances in terms of its force history. So was it an unusual occurrence, or was there something that is you find as being police tactics otherwise?
Do you want to? That's a specific question.
I can't answer the question. I've explained so many times, and I really do understand the frustration, but it's just really not fair on any of the parties involved to make comment on that, because by doing so, we're drawing a conclusion as to its appropriate use or not on that night. So it really isn't appropriate for me to answer. I really do hope that we come back and have a conversation where we can speak more freely around the use of it, but it really isn't appropriate to do that at this moment in time.
The question was about whether it was a normalised practice in other circumstances.
Yeah, but by commenting on the use of it generally, we start to get drawn into its appropriate. I don't have.
So I think
if I have come, can I just finish, please? I have come prepared with the questions that were asked in the survey. I have not come with statistics about the use of CS gas either in Coventry, in the broader West Midlands, or in the country. Had I had that, then yes, I could have brought some basic facts on the use of CS gas, both within my own force and others. But I haven't got that on the top of my head. So, you know, apologies if that is, yes, that may well, yes, I could have shared that had I got that information with me.
Yeah, that was the sort of feed that was being asking what kind of information there was
I mean,
available.
we can share that. You know, we can try and get that information available for, you know, to be shared as part of the sharing of the film, if I can have clarity afterwards around exactly what that question is.
So I'm going to go this way down the panel this time, and I would stress I would like people to focus on future forward issues. So what can people tell me across the panel about, from the questions that have been raised, about what we should be doing in the future?
So on the issue of statistics and the usage of CS gas, I don't have specific statistics either, but I do know that West Midlands Police use tasers more than any other force in the country, and Amnesty International called them trigger happy. So draw from that what you will, I suppose. In terms of shutting down spaces and the question that referenced that, I think it's important to recognise people often accuse us from like having an individual analysis. I don't think we do have an individual analysis, and we want to view this problem as based in larger systemic problems, right? So, you know, Warwick University isn't uniquely evil, Nigel isn't uniquely hypocritical. You know, that isn't the case. What is the case is that there are systemic problems undergirding this, which we really have to understand, and I think that 9K fees is a large part of that, and the free education movement as a whole has an analysis of how these spaces have been closed in the past and how we could open them in the future. I think largely they involve wide-scale social reform.
Coming back to the point you made about the videos, to be completely honest with you, I actually avoid watching the videos because I find it too hard, to be quite honest, because it's an incredibly damaging experience. And so when you do see the videos, what you see is, yes, a very chaotic situation, students perhaps not behaving typically rationally, i.e. screaming, swearing, but I would just argue that was a totally actual rational response to what was being what happened to us. It's a totally legitimate response, and I think that's normal, to be honest. But I think the thing that needs to be stressed here, and looking forward to the future, and what these guys could do, because I don't actually think we were in the wrong in this situation at all. I think these guys are the ones that need to sort it out, is the lack of dialogue. We had absolutely no idea why they were there. In fact, I remember when we were sitting down in our quiet circle discussing free education, not blocking any facilities of the building, we saw the blue flashing lights. We actually turned to each other and said, they cannot possibly be here for us because we're not doing anything wrong. We're literally sitting on the floor in a circle having a seminar on free education. So, I mean, I would just say for those guys, they need to think about dialogue being better for the future.
And at that point in time when we asked, you know, they're not here for us, are they? There was a memorable response, oh, no, they're here for something else.
Separate incident.
Ken.
So, a couple of things. So,
you've said about dialogue needing to be better and continue. I think the fact that we are here is an indication that we do want to have a dialogue and we do want to discuss matters, and people can either take that seriously or not. But part of dialogue is two-way. Part of it is accepting that there may be some things that, and some opinions that individuals have which you don't appreciate, and you have to create the space in which those things can also be heard. And that is not just an obligation for members of staff of the university and other people or sabbatical officers of the Students' Union. It's an obligation that's placed on everyone. So that's important. Cedric, so thank you for reminding me that we met in the law reception. The point about the doors and various other things as if they're sort of at the same level and equivalence of people. I suppose the observation I would make is, of course they're not. Of course they're not. However, just think about the circumstance that was there. We made a choice on that day when we had the larger process to close that building. And we made that choice because there were individuals that already expressed concerns about the level of disruption that they had not just on the night before, but on other events that had happened. But imagine the situation if that door, if there were people in that building at that moment in time. The impact of the action, and Warwick TV have put out their own sort of film which shows what happened at the back there. The fact that you might think that individuals would just sit there and not be bothered by that. The fact that you think that I can't remember the figure you quoted, was it 200 people, 250 people running up the stairs in routes?
250 people up
yeah.
the routes, yeah.
So 250 people running up the stairs, whether we like it or not and whether people accept it or not, there will have been people working in that building who will have felt that that was a scary environment in which to be in. And there has not been any acknowledgement of that at all. No acknowledgement of that at all. So it isn't to say that a door being broken down is of equivalent to the well-being of an individual, but I would like to see some sort of engagement that there were other people affected in this, and that does not appear to have been acknowledged at all in this.
So looking forward then, I think that, we've talked about it quite a lot on the panel, communication here is absolutely crucial. The reasons why relationships break down here is because communication wasn't adequate, and I think that it feeds into a wider issue around people not really feeling like they can engage with the university, and I really hope that we can come up with some really constructive ways of not only the union engaging with the university as representatives, but also for there to be a direct relationship between students and the management of the university. On the point of filming and consent and that sort of thing, I raised that point because I was upset a little bit that I had been recorded without knowing, and after someone had said that they weren't going to record me, then they did, and finding that out months later, which was quite upsetting for me. I've never been in that position before, and I was upset by it. And I think, though, equally, I would be upset if I was at a protest and found out that I was being filmed or photographed or any of the other things. So I think that kind of thing should work both ways. I think we should all trust each other not to record each other or film each other when we don't know that we're being recorded or filmed. So that's my comment on that.
Just to say that I think the fact that we're all willing to come to this meeting shows that we're quite happy to discuss issues with students around these kinds of things. I don't think that's patronising in any way, shape or form. I think it's just a fact that we're willing to do that. And there's no issue, I think, around doing that. Getting the forum in which we can do it is going to be difficult, but that's one of the things that the centre is trying to do. Going on from that, the second thing to say is part of the purpose of this meeting is quite clearly to be constructive. What can we do in the future to prevent a recurrence of the events in December? We've heard a few things. Better communication, we'll work on that. A code of conduct, we'll work on that. Police liaison officers, which are actually now in place. So we're certainly going to try hard to make sure that these events are as non-threatening for everybody as they possibly can be. But we just have to realise that some of these situations, especially because of outside people, are actually extremely dynamic. And it's no good trying to make out that that is not the case, I'm afraid. So there we are.
Anything else to add, Andy?
Right.
No? Okay.
I would like to say something, if I may, and it's really to respond to the point that was made earlier about the whole purpose of protest being to disrupt. Well, if that's the viewpoint, then where does that leave me and my team in trying to manage the impact on everybody else, which is what we try and do? And I would really, really want to see some kind of dialogue that allows us to think about student protest in the way that we manage staff protest. I mean, we have excellent relationships when we have strike days. We engage, no, we do. We engage with the trade unions, we manage it, we've stopped traffic before to allow marches to happen. It all passes off really, really peacefully. But when it's dynamic and when you don't know the extent to which people are actually intending to disrupt, you can't manage the impact on other people. And we try and keep the postgraduate hub open. We try and keep buildings open. We want the buildings and the facilities to be open to everybody. But how do you do that when you have no opportunity to be able to engage with people who are just intent on actually disrupting things? And it makes it really difficult to manage. And I would say that I want to really maintain the health and safety of the whole campus. So a bit of help there would be really, really quite helpful. Okay, and I'd just like to say as well, just a separate point, please, that I was actually filmed by somebody in my office, and it was a case of, it wasn't just a passing filming, it was standing there putting the mobile phone, and I was quite upset about that.
So we have 5 minutes left. We have time for one more round of questions. I've already pointed to people in a bit, but I would ask everyone, we are really keen, and particularly here, to have some real concrete suggestions of how we move forward. For instance, we've had a lot of talk about communication and dialogue. It'd be great to have some ideas, some concrete ideas from the audience about how we can take that forward. We've got a gentleman in the middle. There, yeah, that's right, yeah.
Professor in the chemistry department. I haven't any concrete ideas, but I've just got a couple of observations. So first of all, we've heard about stakeholders, and I think one of the reasons Warwick has been very successful, we have a range of stakeholders, but we have to realise that students are our biggest stakeholder. And going forward, we will be going forward obviously under a new Vice-Chancellor, and it's going to be very important that we get the right Vice-Chancellor, because they're going to set the tone for the university going forward as well. And I was really quite dismayed when I saw the advert for our new Vice-Chancellor that's been out in the Times Higher. It mentions lots of things about business, engagement, things that I do myself. It doesn't mention students, it doesn't mention education, it doesn't mention staff. And what I've heard this afternoon, it's really, we've got to really get students back at the centre of Warwick University.
Have you spoken already? I'm sorry, you haven't. Good, okay. And then I've got one at the back there, the lady right at the back. Will be the last.
Hi, I'm Elspeth, final year History and French undergraduate. In terms of concrete suggestions, I know that Isaac Lee, our incoming SU president, put forward the idea of a termly question time with the Vice-Chancellor. Would you pledge here and now to commit to that? Secondly, in terms of going forward, Nigel Thrift, you've talked with Callum brought up the idea of national clout, and you, in response to that, you said we're a relatively small institution in a very large pond. I find that very contradictory to lots of other things that have been said today about the fact that on the World Reputation Survey, we clearly do have a huge amount of national clout as a university, and I think what people are calling for is the university's support using that national clout. To support in terms of the free education movement, for your support.
We have one more question about lady right at the back. Yeah.
The lady here made a very good point about police on presence, and she made it really well. But I just want to reinforce that, because a member has just made a point about that we're suggesting police liaison officers on campus. I'd like to say that for certain communities in the UK, especially BME communities, that don't have a positive relationship with the police on campus actually make them feel unsafe. So please. I think going forward it would be a good start if the injunction was lifted that we respected the right of staff and students to exercise their civil rights to protest and assembly.
So I'm going to go down the panel again for the last time this way. There are three issues there. I think there's the advert that's gone out in relation to the new Vice-Chancellor. There's the issue of the question and answer session. I suppose I'd ask all members of the panel have talked about dialogue. So if they could comment on that as a specific idea, if they reject that idea, if they could come up with very concrete suggestions for the end. So concrete suggestions of how this dialogue and communication can happen, that would be very welcome. And then there's the issue of the injunction as well. So if we can start down.
Okay,
down
yeah, thank you. I guess really for me, I was hoping we'd have more time to look forwards really, rather than backwards. And I think it'd be really great for the organisers of any further protests to sit down with me, sit down with John Pittman. We'll plan in the... Miguel, you're shaking your head, it's disappointing that is. We'd sit down, we'd have a coffee, we'd...
I'm afraid of you, because of what you've done to me.
Like what? What have I done?
We're not going to enter into a dialogue at this stage.
So, okay,
if we could focus on responses
finish.
that are future orientated and are concrete about where we go forward.
Okay, so I want to sit down with protest organisers, any protests in the future, have a meaningful dialogue. Let's plan things in advance and we can keep everybody safe. Okay? How does that sound?
Shh, please. Can we just let the panellists respond? We've had some good questions asked. We'd like the panellists to have some time to respond to them, please.
I've said the same. You know, I would welcome any dialogue and engagement with people so that we can actually plan these things properly and ensure that protests can happen in a safe and safe way, basically. So I don't think I can add any more to that. If I can't, then we have to demand, we have to, operate on a dynamic basis, and that makes it really challenging. And I don't think maybe everybody in the room quite appreciates that.
Thank you. I think, just to clarify a point, I think where we talked about police liaison officers, it was actually protest liaison officers, which was, I think, one of the approaches that was taken on the 4th that I think was a real positive step forward in terms of where police officers do need to be present, but using that least intrusive option at the earliest opportunity. So I think that was just a point of clarity. In relation to the police relationship with BME communities, and indeed with any communities, I'm not prepared to accept that if there is a poor relationship, that means we don't have any relationship, and I will do... And what I'm trying to say is that really saddens me that you do feel unsafe, and what I don't want to do is see that that's okay. I don't think that's acceptable on our part, and we need to do something about that. And my offer is that I will do whatever I can in my power to have a dialogue in order to try to improve that, because it's not acceptable to say, for whatever reasons, if people are afraid of us, and
please.
But that's... And if that's what people feel, then that's fine. I will come and speak with people. But I don't want, as the Commander of Coventry, to accept that, because that's not good for society, and it's certainly not good for the City of Coventry or for the students at Warwick University or for any of you as you move forward in your lives. What I'm saying is I'm happy to speak to anyone and have a dialogue about it, but I'm certainly not prepared to accept it. That means that we shouldn't be on campus or having an engagement with any of you.
The issue of termly question time, it's something we will look at. I'm not willing to pledge straight to it because of the practicalities. And the main practicality is there's not much point in simply turning up to a group that's just one set of students who want to shout back at you the whole time. What I want to do is have a genuine dialogue, and that's the issue. If we could arrange something like that, I'd be very happy to do it. But that's what would need to be arranged.
On that point, seeing as I brought it up, sorry, Isaac, that sorry, I'm going to speak on behalf of you now, but I believe that, he wouldn't have put that on his manifesto if that's not something that he could believe could be delivered, and I know that he will work really hard to ensure that a dialogue with senior management and students is in place.
Yeah, so two things. So advert for the new Vice-Chancellor, read the further particulars where the job is described, and I'm very, very happy to make that available. It's all together. But I take the point that you've made. No, I take the point that you've made, but I think you need to see... Yeah. Okay. Well, I take the point you're making. I take the point... I take the point you're making, but I am still going to say, though, just see the whole package. It's only one part of the overall thing, and it's also important to say that the President of the Students' Union sits as a full member of the appointing panel for the Vice-Chancellor, which doesn't happen in every university, but Kat will certainly be a member of the joint committee, which will then make a recommendation to the Senate and the Council. So we'll have an opportunity to make sure that that is the case. Kat has been consulted on the further particulars and has made suggestions which have improved them. So, but that is the case. I suppose I've got a particular view on the issue of police, and maybe it's because of being connected to the university for such a long time, and people can either take this, dismiss it, etc., etc. So I understand from different areas, different backgrounds, different communities, that people will have a different perception of what the police are, what their role is, etc., etc. I suppose I come at it from, so I lived on campus for 8 years, dealt with lots of different situations. There are situations, whether we like it or not, where you need to have the police here. If a student dies during arrivals weekend, which has happened on 2 occasions, you need to have the police here. If there is an attack on an individual who calls the police and wants them to be here, an assault of any sort, then you do need to have the police here. And the fact is, not every single student at the university lives on the campus. Quite a few students of this university live outside in the wider community. So how do you build a bridge? How do you actually get a better understanding of what goes on if you just avoid it? Part of the job that we have is to try and build those bridges, and I think if we can, if there are issues that people have got and concerns, then they should be raised and they should be listened to and they should be reacted to. But simply just pushing the issue away, I don't think when someone leaves the campus and goes to live in Coventry or Leamington or anywhere else, that's helping that situation at all. What about the injunction? So the injunction, our intention at this stage is to sustain the injunction in its current form. But I go back to the point I said before, that I hope that we are not in a position that we have to use it.
Okay, so I think the feeling in the room is evident and the anger is palpable. You talk about a diverse range of opinions on this. Where are they? They're not represented here. I think management, you need to listen. Listen to what your students and your staff are saying. They're right here. They're telling you this now. You talk about dialogue, Nigel. You talk about negotiations. Management had their chance to do that. We forced a negotiations meeting with them, and it was an utter disgrace. And I would like to say that during that time, 3 universities went into an occupation similar to ours. Lancaster, Sheffield and University of West England, their vice-chancellors all engaged with their demands and all engaged with their negotiation meetings. And some of them actually had successful discussions on that. So don't sit there and act like you couldn't have done it. You actively chose not to do it when you could have done it, and that is a disgrace. And finally, when it comes to the new vice-chancellor, Nigel, you've got a real opportunity here. Set an example. Listen to this. Set an example. There are easy things you can do. Number 1, retract your unbelievably biased statement that you made shortly after the December 3rd and apologise for it, number 2. And number 3, condemn the disproportionate use of police violence on your students.
Finally, talking about the management of protests, citing UCU as an example of how you've had excellent management of protests. Well, UCU also had a 15% pay cut, so frankly, whatever they're doing, I don't think it's working. So, you know, if UCU are suffering pay cuts like that, I don't think we're going to repeat their model. I think in terms of progressively going forwards, I think I'm going to add 2 demands which I think are very clear. Cops off campus and lifting the injunction, right? Both are very clear. If you support peaceful protests, occupations are peaceful. You should support them. Cops off campus works in Brazil, Chile, Greece and Turkey. And as we've explored and as people have contributed, it is a very viable option. And our Vice-Chancellor, our representatives, should be looking to actively investigate that issue. We'll certainly be doing that with the student body. And we hope that we can talk about progressive structural changes going forward beyond like mere like superficial bollocks.
Okay. We're going to end there because we have the arts and the staff have a film to prepare for. But thanks. I mean, a few words to finish. Thanks to everyone for their time and their ideas. People come here today. People who responded to the survey. It's not an easy conversation. We never thought it would be, and at times it's been heated today. But there are ideas that have come out of it, I think, that are embryonic, but that can be built on. There are issues around a code of conduct. There is all kinds of talk about communication and dialogue being improved, and some concrete ideas that might come from that. We will write up a short report of this summit where we will focus on what we think are the ideas that have been generated that might go forward, and we'll ask all of our panelists to contribute their thoughts on the concrete steps that can be taken to ensure that we build on the ideas that have been raised today. And we will communicate all of that to the wider Warwick community. Thank you again for your time, and we'll be in touch.